Hey, it's Emil. Hey, Emil. Someone just got that pun today. It's or the sounds like, oh, a meal? Like lunch? Like you're not buying lunch today? How are you, everyone? It's me, Emil. Emil Amok to you. This is my micro talk show. Welcome to Emil Amok's Takeout. My takes on all things considerable. I mean, we're talking about lots of things today. Today's a special day, especially if you're Filipino, but especially if you're kind of a fighter, a rebel of sorts. If you are a leader of a sovereign piece of, I don't call it a nation, but if you're a leader of a sovereign people, a free people, and someone comes up to you and says, I want to take this land of yours, well, then you should know LapuLapu. Today is LapuLapu Day. It's an official they call it a working holiday in the Philippines. We're going to talk about that today because this is the day in 1521. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine in 1521, I'd be banging my gong. If you can watch me now, if you're watching me now, you know I stand in my gong closet next to my gong, and my Philippine. This is Filipiniana, a barong Tagalog. Actually, LapuLapu was Visayan, but that's all right. You know that's the Philippines. 7,200 islands, an archipelago of a bon melange of Filipino-ness. Yes, and people know that this is a Mindanao gong, not a Bontoc gong, which would be flat. This has a little Mindanao nose and a garland left over from Christmas. Anyway, and I'm Ilocano. So, welcome to the program. Well, lots to talk about. We're going to talk about LapuLapu Day. I'm just sort of like building up to it during this Lanyap section because a lot of people don't know who LapuLapu is. And I'm just trying to say the context is broad. If you are, as I said, if you represent a sovereign nation or sovereign people and someone comes up to you and says, hey, I want to take what's yours and make it mine, you got to stand up. You got to slay that opposing force. That's why we honor LapuLapu today in the Philippines of all places, right? The Philippines. This is what the Philippines is known for. LapuLapu slayed Magellan on this day, April 27th, 1521. 1521. That's how long the Filipinos have been really badass MFs, right? I mean, that was a badass move by a guy who was the leader of these people standing up to Magellan, the explorer. I mean, Magellan, you know he was Portuguese, right? He's one of those Portuguese guys sailing for Spain. Magellan. He slayed Magellan. That's worth something. You got to remember LapuLapu. And because LapuLapu, I mean, this can't be the first time you heard of LapuLapu. This is his day. Anyway, it's a working holiday in the Philippines. It's nothing here, but I'm honoring it. Filipinos and Filipinos at heart need to honor it because just think of the equation. Think of, well, as I said, you're a leader of a sovereign nation. Someone comes up and wants to take something that's yours. You stand up for yourself, for your people. You slay Magellan. You slay that opposing force. Who can you think of right now in our present time who is LapuLapu like? I mean, we hasn't done it yet. I mean, he chased people out of Kyiv, chased the invaders out of Kyiv, but the fight is not over. In fact, if it weren't for the green t-shirts, I'd say, yeah, the modern day LapuLapu, Volodymyr Zelensky, a LapuLapu of sorts. Like I said, he's got to ditch the green t-shirt though. I mean, just and go like bare chested, and maybe show off a couple of, melee tattoos, maybe a headdress, like a little LapuLapu. If you don't know get to know LapuLapu, because he's for all the guys who stand up to the encroachers, stand up to the invaders, stand up to the people, or stand up to, you got to stand up to the guy who wants to take what's yours and what he has no right of taking. And that's what LapuLapu did April 27th in the Visayas, Cebu, the Battle of Mactan, April 27th, 1521. He defeated the Spanish forces. Just LapuLapu and some warriors. Ferdinand Magellan was there. And they killed Magellan. It ended Mr. Circumnavigation. The circumnavigation of Voyage of Magellan. Died there in Mactan in the Philippines, 1521. And like I said, I said Zelensky is the modern day LapuLapu. Well, we don't know yet. Zelensky took care of Kyiv. He protected Kyiv and chased the Russians out. But, today Zelensky did something that was sort of a kind of a LapuLapu move when there were some artillery shelling in Russia and in Moldova, and essentially the Ukrainians took credit for it. Zelensky made some kind of statement that kind of beat his chest, saying that, hey, if you're going to come in, take our land, take our people, at some point, he mentioned karma too. That was the strange thing in Zelensky's message. He said, at some point, karma is going to come back and get you. He was talking to the generic Russian evil that was coming down on his country. Anyway, we don't know yet on Zelensky if he ultimately will win. But here's the truth about LapuLapu. When LapuLapu killed Magellan in 1521, on April 27th, 1521, it delayed the Spanish occupation by about 40 years. It didn't exactly snuff it out. But 1521, LapuLapu kills Magellan. 1564, another expedition by Miguel Lopez de Legazpi comes in to actually colonize the Philippines for Spain. And in fact, Spain was in the Philippines for 333 years. So it's the imperfect history. We want to praise LapuLapu for standing up for his people, right? Here comes the Spanish, the Portuguese guy in the boat, Mr. Circumnavigation. They get them. It delays colonization by about 40 years, but that's about it. And then later, 333 years, Spain comes in. That's how long they colonized the Philippines until, of course, they give it up. They sell the Philippines for a pittance, 20 million, and mostly for the Catholic artifacts and the buildings and the churches. 20 million. They sell the Philippines. Spain does. Sells it to the United States. So yeah, we Americans, the U.S., we're on the bad guy side of the LapuLapu equation. And then who should emerge to stand up to the Americans but Philippine-American War, 1898. The Malolos Republic, the first democratic republic in Asia, formed by Emilio Aguinaldo, and that began the Philippine-U.S. War, or the U.S.-Philippine War. There's a debate about, which goes first. Well, the U.S. were the invaders. But it was a long, long struggle. The U.S. wanted to be the colonizer, but they had to fight for it. They couldn't just buy it from Spain after the Spanish-American War. A little bit of history to start off our show on LapuLapu Day. I mean, it's interesting because LapuLapu, I hear about him all the time. He's the guy with the spear. He's the guy who cuts down Magellan. But as the story goes, Magellan comes into the Philippines in service of Spain, and LapuLapu refused to give tribute to the Spanish king. Midnight of April 27th, 1521. Magellan led a force of around 60 Spaniards and 20 to 30 warboats into Cebu. They arrived in Mactan 3 hours before dawn. And because of the presence of the rocky seas, the coral reefs, Magellan couldn't get his ship onto the shores of Mactan. So they had to anchor, and they were far from the beach, apparently. Magellan said he would not attack if LapuLapu swore fealty to the Raja Humabon, who obeyed the Spanish king. And again, LapuLapu rejected. And the battle did not begin until morning, but Magellan, trying to impress Humabon's warriors with the superiority of European armor, told Humabon's warriors to remain in their ships. Magellan waded across because of the rocky waters, right? He couldn't get on the beach. Waited to meet LapuLapu's forces, and they set fire to a few houses on the shore, trying to scare LapuLapu and the people there in Mactan. LapuLapu became enraged because who is this man coming in onto our, where we call home, and trying to burn down houses? He charged. They killed 2 Spaniards immediately, and Magellan was wounded in the leg with a poisoned arrow. He ordered a retreat, which most of his men followed. But essentially, Magellan's forces were outnumbered, and they were overwhelmed by the warriors. And Magellan and several of his men were killed. That's the Battle of Mactan. And you see that Magellan kind of miscalculated what he could do. And he fell to the powerful Datu, the leader in the Visayas, LapuLapu. And so it's a big day in the Philippines. I think for all people who hate the colonizers and revere the rebel within, it's a good day to salute. Take your head off. LapuLapu. I was reading, it's a working holiday in the Philippines. You know, if they had it right in the Philippines, they would pull a LapuLapu against the second coming of Marcos. But apparently they're not too LapuLapu in the Philippines, or not LapuLapu enough. I mean, they are embracing Ferdinand Marcos Jr., Bong Bong Marcos. If you caught this show yesterday, I talked a lot about a column I wrote for the Inquirer.net. Catch the column, Inquirer.net, where I wonder aloud. I write, can that anti-Marcos spirit be revived? And I just recalled that time in the 80s here in the United States, where Marcos was coming in to spend time in the States. He was checking into the St. Francis Hotel. And I remember because I was outside with about, I think it was about 1,000. It felt like 1,000 protesters, and it was mixed because it was, Marcos was a dividing force in the Filipino community. So he'd bring out those who loved him and those who hated him. And then he'd also bring out the Americans, especially those on the left, who thought that Marcos was being put up as a puppet by Ronald Reagan and George Bush, the father. And so people from the left would show up. It would be a crowd. Union Square. I just remember going there and seeing these progressives and leftists and unionists all there just to get a glimpse of Marcos, to let him hear the message of how much they wanted the end of martial law, how they wanted him out. This was in the early 80s too, like 82, 83. It was also my first time I met Imelda Marcos. I didn't really meet her. She was coming along the hallway at the St. Francis, and I had my trusty microphone, and I tried to interview her, and people just saw me as a Filipino guy in a suit. They thought I was Filipino Secret Service, and so they just let me go through. And when they saw me extend my it was a clenched fist, but it was holding a microphone. So I was just extending the microphone out to Madam Marcos. The Secret Service of both the Filipinos, who thought I was just one of them, and the Americans, they just, held me back and restrained me. They thought I was attacking Madam Imelda Marcos. I said, no, I'm a reporter. So anyway, that kind of crowd was possible in the 80s because Marcos was a lightning rod. He divided the community and everyone was out there. And I just think we need to see something like that if there's a hope of reversing what doesn't have to be inevitable, but what seems to be inevitable, which is the reinstallation of the Marcos family to power in the Philippines. And it's important now, I think, for Filipinos. May 9th is the election. But already in the United States, they're voting absentee. There's about almost 2 million between the United States and Canada who are voting overseas. A group of people turned in their ballots on Saturday in the Washington, D.C. area to the embassy in Washington. And they had a nice crowd, about 300 people. They were chanting, they were demonstrating. And it reminded me of the kind of fervor that used to clearly be there whenever anyone would mention Marcos. And sadly, I would have hoped it would have been greater than what we saw on the video clips. I mean, I was not in Washington, but I saw it on the video. I would have hoped that there was more concern, especially now when we're talking about democracy being threatened everywhere, globally. And now in the Philippines, we have an election where in this democratic election, the son of a man who was chased out of the Philippines for his crude, his murderous, his pilfering, plundering dictatorship, talking about Ferdinand Marcos, chased out, forced into exile. We are now seemingly on the verge of watching the Marcos family be restored to the leadership in the Philippines. It's just kind of astounding, really, when you get the whole geo-global picture here of what's going on, that the Philippines, the very democracy that was created in the likeness of the United States, from the court to the Congress, Constitution, they do the vice presidency a little differently there. They separate the two offices and they're sort of independent. But the Philippine democracy was made in the image of the United States. And to see us on the verge of witnessing the Filipinos choosing, the polls are showing like outrageous leads on the part of Bongbong Marcos over his two closest rivals. It's just astonishing to me. And that's why I ask, can that anti-Marcos spirit be revived? Because without it, I don't know if we're going to see, I don't know if we're going to see what we want to see. We're hoping for a free election to elect a leader who will lead the Philippines along its democratic path. I don't think we want to see the second coming of Marcos when the family which plundered, stole $10 billion from the Philippine treasury. I don't think we want to see them put back into power, do we? I don't think so. I don't think so. Anyway, catch that column on the can that anti-Marcos spirit be revived on Inquirer.net. Inquirer, INQUIRER.net. Maybe there's a LapuLapu, a modern LapuLapu in the Philippines who'll stand up. Is it Lenny Robredo, the vice president? Is it the mayor of Manila, who is like faring well in the polls? It's worth watching. The election actually is held in the Philippines May 9th, but overseas Filipinos are voting now, sending their ballots back in. Hopefully they'll be counted. We'll be watching. It's a democracy that's very, very important historically to America. I bring it up because, as I said, this is LapuLapu Day. We need a world LapuLapu Day. Who's LapuLapu now in the Philippines who's going to stand up to this notion that a smiling son of a dictator can just come in and not even debate his opponents and just come in and just figure he can win on the strength of his family's infamous name. All right, so we talked about LapuLapu. It's an important thing. It's history. And like I said, it's not far-fetched to see Zelensky as the modern global LapuLapu right now. What he's doing, standing up to the Russian forces coming in. It almost sounds like when I was describing the Battle of Mactan, when, LapuLapu's boat, or LapuLapu was standing on the shore. Magellan couldn't get his boats into the harbor because of the coral reefs. So they stopped and got out and started walking. Bad move. It almost sounds like the Russians rolling in their tanks, thinking, oh, well, we'll take over the Ukrainians. And of course they didn't. Oh, we're going to topple Kiev. Of course they didn't. Oh, we're going to do this. Well, they are shelling Mariupol, and more mass graves are being discovered. But Zelensky's holding them off. I hate to see what's happening because things are escalating a little bit every day. Today, Russia cut off gas supplies to Poland and Bulgaria, I believe. And everyone in Europe is wondering, well, who's next? And I think it's going to unite, not make the Europeans fold. And I think it's causing the West, NATO, allies, to rethink, how much longer is this just a war of just throwing military equipment at it? But at some point, we have to really be in it to win it. That is the unfortunate cliche, because the more I see things move toward a direction, it is almost impossible to keep things peaceful. I mean, we want to not get involved, but the more I hear things like, well, we want to make sure Russia is punished, we want to make sure that Russia is weakened, it sounds like war. Like we're at war. All right, couple other things I want to mention in our show today. The AAPI History Museum, it's come up. This is important because Grace Meng, Representative Grace Meng, the Asian American Museum bill, passed yesterday. Some of you may know I was the former director of the Filipino American National History Museum, and it's important stuff. The history of our culture, either the broad culture, Asian American culture, the individual ethnicities, you realize how important it is to get the word out, to get the story out, or to have a place where all of this information, soft and hard, by hard I mean artifacts, mementos, soft I mean just a place where we can go and celebrate accomplishments, culture. It's important to have that space. And Grace Meng got her bill, H.R. 3525. It seeks to create the first national museum dedicated to preserving the history, culture, and accomplishments of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, the AAPI. And so as we approach AAPI Heritage Month, it's ideal that we have this. Call your congressman. Say, yeah, we definitely need H.R. 3525. We got to get it passed. We got to have a thing going. We have to have I know they have programs. I know they have a connection with the Smithsonian. And I've talked to people in the past about, well, okay, they have a black museum, they have, they have all these other museums. When are they going to have an Asian American museum? I remember when I was writing stuff for for NBC News Asian America, I did a number of things with Franklin Oda, who used to run the Asian American place there. And I know some other guys now who are part of that, that group that will determine what the Smithsonian does for Asian Americans. So I haven't looked at the specifics of the bill of this 3525, but it's going to take a collaborative effort from existing and new sources coming together to try to make this work. But it's needed. It's needed in that. I know I saw one exhibit, a traveling exhibit at the Field in Chicago on Genghis Khan. Man, you want to talk about a badass Asian. And just spending a couple hours just immerse in all, his narrative and some of the artifacts that they have. It's enriching, and it's amazing we don't have a permanent place that's somewhere. Nation's capital would be ideal, right? Contact your congressman, Senate, or the House of Reps, because the Senate's going to have to pass it ultimately. HR 3525. A bill to preserve in the first national museum dedicated to Asian American Pacific Islanders. We need it. All right, so let me talk a couple other things. Kamala Harris has COVID. She says she's asymptomatic. I'm glad for that. I think this is her next assignment, though, right? I mean, we can't say, oh, poor Kamala. Yeah, poor Kamala, of course. But she's asymptomatic, which means one thing. She's boosted. The being boosted has worked. I mean, she's not on, heaven forbid, I don't think she's on her deathbed. She's asymptomatic. She's recovering. She's just in isolation. But I think this is a good sign that normal is going to look something like this. Normal is going to look like, well, we're going to be part of life. Viruses are out there. We can catch them, even though we're boosted and all vaccined up. It doesn't stop us from getting sick. All the vaccines and boosters do is stop us from dying. So we'll get sick, but we won't die. We'll get sick, but we won't go to the hospital. It won't be as severe. Although I understand that she's getting all the antivirals, the Paxlovid. I had a friend come down with COVID recently, trying to get Paxlovid to her. You have to be in a protected group, though. Like, you have to be older. If you're younger, you have to do it within a certain time. But I think those kind of restrictions were on because the Paxlovid wasn't readily available. It's now more so. So we have more tools to use to fight COVID-19. I just think, well, hats off to the vice president. She's the first Asian American, really. I mean, you think about it. Highest ranking Asian American. So our thoughts are with the vice president, and let's hope that she comes up with, in conjunction with the president, to come up with a way to show all the world, to show Americans, to show Asian Americans who are still in their closets like me. I go out. I just, I'm just cautious. But maybe it shows that, hey, this is the new normal, how we live our lives post COVID. We are as careful as we can be. We wear a mask when we can. We're not shamed or bullied into not wearing a mask. If we want to wear a mask, we do. But let's follow Kamala. Let's follow her cue and see that getting COVID isn't the worst. And we kind of know that. I mean, most of us know someone who's had it just within the last few weeks. I mean, Nancy Pelosi has it. I forgot that she got it. I think she was at the gridiron dinner. A lot of Congress people got it because they were at that gridiron dinner. And another dinner's coming up this week. The White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is it's a large gathering in a small setting relative to the number of people who are there. But it's at the Washington Hilton, and it's relatively low ceilings. I understand some people aren't going to attend, like Anthony Fauci says he's not going to attend. But I would suggest that if you're in the Washington, D.C. area, still time to be prudent. But we'll learn from Kamala's example that we can live our lives post-COVID. We just need to be careful. All right, one more thing I want to share with you, and it's a column not written by me. So, God, that's got to be good. I want to refer you to a column by Jennifer Rubin. She sometimes goes on MSNBC. I don't usually watch her when she is normally on, but she writes for the Washington Post, and I like her because she's a conservative who, in normal times, I wouldn't even bother reading, because I would think, I would read her from time to time. Let's just say she wouldn't be on my list of people to read on a daily basis. But she's a good writer. She has provocative opinions. And I think what's important in this column that she wrote today is that she is generally considered a conservative, considered a pro-Republican conservative. And when I do read her, it's to understand or get a perspective of someone like that, who writes honestly. I mean, that's the big thing. How many honest conservatives can you say are out there writing op-eds? I mean, most of them are these ideologues who cite off party talking points, and you can see what the party's thinking, but they don't have that authentic ring of a real conservative person, or someone who's independent of the party. So the one thing that Jennifer Rubin has that I respect, and which is why I read her, is because she is coming from the right, but she has learned how to be just horrified by the right and by what the right is doing. So this is, I guess you would call him a never Trumper, or you'd call him the people against these people would say, oh, you're Republican in name only. No, these are conservatives who are fair, and they're writing about the people they used to revere, the people they used to say, oh, these are members of this big tent Republican Party. And so I take notice when she calls them out, because it's a conservative calling out other conservatives versus a conservative like Kevin McCarthy kowtowing to Donald Trump, or a conservative like Michelle Steele, the Korean American woman married to a Republican Party committee member, claiming racism, right? I think people who are self-critical are often coming in with the insight we need. So here's Jennifer Rubin in her column, "The GOP is no longer a party. It's a movement to impose white Christian nationalism." I think that's just somebody who calls it what it is, right? Thank goodness. That kind of honesty, that kind of refreshing honesty, we haven't seen since, I don't know. I mean, you don't usually get that from a Republican, right? You don't usually get that kind of straight talk. You get the kind of talk that we get out of Kevin McCarthy, who says, "Oh, well, yeah, I wanted Trump to resign, but I never said that." Oh, yeah. Kevin McCarthy he didn't have the big lie. The big lie was Trump, but it's forced all these other Republicans to come up with their small lies to justify their own political existence. So here's Jennifer Rubin writing, "People might be confused about how a Republican Party that once worried about government overreach now seeks to control medical care for transgender children and retaliate against a corporation for objecting to a bill targeting LGBTQ students." Now that's something, right? I mean, they're worried about government overreach, but they want the government to overreach on transgender children and on LGBTQ students. Overreach is fine for the people I don't like, right? Hypocrisy. And why is it that the most ambitious Republicans are spending more time battling non-existent critical race theory in schools than on healthcare or inflation? To explain this, one must acknowledge that the GOP is not a political party anymore. It is a movement dedicated to imposing white Christian nationalism. See, I could say that. And you would say, "Oh, Emil, you're full of it." But you have a Republican or a right-wing type, conservative type, saying it in her column, like Jennifer Rubin, and you say, well, that says something. It's not exactly self-immolation, but it's a kind of honesty that we don't see among conservatives. Back to the article. "The media blandly describes the GOP's obsessions as culture wars." See, it's not really culture wars. It's something more. "But that suggests there is another side seeking to impose its views on others. In reality, only one side is repudiating pluralistic democracy. White, Christian, and mainly rural Americans who are becoming a minority group and want to maintain their political power." We've been talking about this ever since the census. We've been talking about this ever since the actual census came out. I mean, even before they were thinking about counting them. But then when the census came out, we saw the numbers, and we saw the numbers dwindling for whites in America. We knew that the only way they could maintain their power was to declare that the Republican Party, as this new minority, as the new white minority, is for a white Christian nationalism that is abhorrent and hypocritical to everything that our Constitution stands for. White Christian nationalism. That's like Christian Nazis, essentially, right? If Adolf Hitler was carrying a Bible and maybe shaved off his mustache and sang hymns, I mean, that's what nationalism, white Christian nationalism is. The result, back to Rubin, is an alarming pattern. Any moment of social progress is soon followed by reactionary panic and claims of victimhood. Oh, where have we seen that before? Claims of victimhood. We were talking about Michelle Steele yesterday. Oh, someone was attacking me because they said it was racist. Michelle Steele, Korean American woman, claiming victimhood, Republican. Should become clear now, right? It's no mere coincidence that Donald Trump, the leader of the birther movement, succeeded the first African American president. Nor should the anti-critical race theory movement surprise anyone given the mass protests in the wake of George Floyd's murder in 2020. Understanding his phenomenon is crucial to preserving pluralistic democracy. Sherilyn Ifill, former head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, recently recalled the period of protests after Floyd's murder in an engrossing podcast with former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. The movement, Ifill explained, was the first time many Americans collectively empathize with those who had experienced systemic injustice. But those who are arrayed in opposition to justice and equality have not lost sight of it, she said. What they saw in the protest is part of what undergirds the current movement that you're seeing around the country right now. Thus, Ifill argued, the MAGA crowd is frantically maneuvering to halt education about the truth of the history of racism and white supremacy, of the struggle for justice in this country. The goal is to stymie the development of children's empathy and the awareness of racial injustice. In a real sense, the MAGA response is an effort to conserve power and to counteract the sense of a shared fate with Americans who historically have been marginalized. The right now defines itself not with policies, but with its angry tone, its malicious labeling and insults, e.g., groomer. I first heard groomer the other day. It's the person who enables a pedophile is a groomer. Or how about the word woke? Rubin cites woke. She says, it's targeting of LGBTQ youths and dehumanization of immigrants. That's all part of it, right? Right-wingers attempt to cast their opponents as sick, dangerous, and above all, not real Americans, is as critical to securing power as voter suppression. The indignation of MAGA personalities when presented with the reality of systematic racism is telling and very much in line with white evangelical Christian views. As Robert P. Jones, the head of the Public Religion Research Institute, has written extensively, explained in an interview with Governing, what we saw in the 20th century was that edifice of white supremacy that got built with the support of white Christian leaders and pastors and churches. Once it was built, the best way to protect it was to make it invisible, to create a kind of theology that was so inward focused that Christianity was only about personal piety. It was disconnected from social justice, politics, the world. It led white Christians to be fairly narcissistic and indifferent to injustice all around them. Martin Luther King Jr. had that line in Letter from Birmingham Jail, where he's in dismay not about racist Christians, but about so-called moderates in Birmingham, the more cautious than courageous white Christians who remain silent behind the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. The anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. Do you wonder how people suddenly, this is me now, do you wonder how suddenly people just lose their religion? They lose their moral compass and they don't act and they just let their religion, their spirituality be debased by not acting, by not being courageous. As King said, it's not the racist Christians. It's really about the moderates, the more cautious than courageous white Christians who remain silent. And that's the way it's working now, especially as the GOP wants to flog this idea that, oh, there's critical race theory out there. Today, those who argue that America is a white Christian nation simultaneously insist they are devoid of bigotry. Oh, yeah, they're Christians, right? The MAGA crowd is offended by any attempt to identify the ongoing reality of systemic racism, evident, for example, in the criminal justice system, maternal health care, housing discrimination, and gerrymandering to reduce minority voting power. The notion that institutions they refuse to reform perpetuate racism is a sort of moral challenge to their claim to be colorblind. Perhaps it is simply self-interested blindness. So this is a conservative columnist taking to task the right. It's Jennifer Rubin writing in her piece, "The GOP is no longer a party. It's a movement to impose white Christian nationalism." And you can see it all the way down the line, all the issues. And I think it's important. And this critical race theory idea is very important because you get that out of the schools, it's not being taught. But the idea that what they want is they want to make sure that no one understands the importance of racial empathy, that no one sees their opposition as real. They're foreign, they're liars, they're cheats. They aren't worth it to be on the same platform as you. Here's Rubin's bottom line. Our political problems are significant, but they are minor compared with the moral confusion that is afflicting the millions of white Christian Americans who consider themselves victims. Left unaddressed, this will smother calls for empathy, tolerance, and justice. Yeah. And it will further divide our country and make people who are confused and see themselves as victims feel the need to rise up and fight as the white minority, as the white nationalistic, right? White Christian nationalists that are emerging from the GOP. And the GOP is playing into it because it's their only way that they can see to keep their movement pure and to keep their movement white. It's the only way. There are other Republicans, sure, who've advocated big tent. We saw that. We saw that in 2000. We saw that with George W. Bush. We saw it in Philadelphia, right? What year was that? The George Bush Philadelphia Convention. We saw that when they had Chaka Khan sing, and then they were singing the OJ songs and Love Train, right? That's when the GOP really was going for, oh, excuse me, that was 2000, right? That was when the GOP was realistic and honest about the diversity, the growing diversity in America. And then something happened. And then the fringe of the party took over. Trump was elected. And his acolytes and his loyalists have propagated. And this is why the GOP is no longer a party. As Jennifer Rubin's column says, the movement is one that wants to impose white Christian nationalism. So, read her column in the Washington Post today. But it's interesting because, like I said, you see it individually, right? People claiming victimhood. Michelle Steele. When Jay Chen makes a comment about not really understanding how her politics work, he wasn't talking about her accent, but she makes it about her accent because it enables her to say, "Oh, I'm a victim. I'm a victim of racism." You're not, Michelle Steele. You are not a victim of racism. But that's the game they play. That's a game they want to play, or they see is going to get them another election, get them elected. They're a minority party. They're realizing that, and they're acting like a white minority, which it saddens me, because we could come together, work together as Americans, and end the division. But that doesn't seem to be happening. Anyway, interesting column. Jennifer Rubin, Washington Post. Check it out. So here we are. I wanted to talk a little about Twitter, because suddenly it's like it's the more Twitter articles, more Twitter comments are coming out. This is a real thing. I said this yesterday, that it wasn't exactly my mea culpa, but it was me saying that when I first heard the story and as it was reported, it was Musk buying it, but Musk buying shares. It didn't sound like a total buyout and then take it private. It sounded like, oh, he's going to buy shares. He can be the largest share. He was going to buy all the shares. He was going to be the dominant shareholder. If he's a dominant shareholder, then there's some people who might have a minority voice and have a say. But from the way it's being described, it sounds like he wants it all. It's his sandbox, and he wants it his way, which that scares me. That how can you say, I want to be the public square, Twitter is the public square, and then take things private? Doesn't happen. I think well, I don't know if it's going to end up, how it's going to end up, but it doesn't sound like it's on the right path. Already I'm seeing people say things like, well, it sounds like people saying, I'm quitting Twitter is the new, I'm going to move to Canada out of protest. I haven't quit Twitter. I'm still on it. I don't think I'm going to quit Twitter, but I think I'm just going to use it less. I think I'm going to use Facebook more. Although Facebook had a little hiccup yesterday with some of the things I posted. But believe me, the Elon Musk story isn't over. And the more I read about Elon Musk and what he wants, I just think he's just buying another shiny, bright object, right? Just like that company he has that wants to put chips in people's bodies. I think I'm more scared about that than I am about what he's going to do to Twitter. But here's the thing. On Twitter, you can say anything you want. I mean, if under Musk, you can say anything you want. I think that bodes ill for people of color. That bodes ill for people who are minorities. That bodes ill for people who take unpopular stands. Because if you've ever been trolled or ever been harassed in social media, it's scary. I mean, you don't know where things are coming from. And ultimately, what they do is force you to block them, force you to leave. And then what have they done? They've censored you. So if Elon Musk has a solution to that, I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear what his idea is to have this totally free space and then to protect people who are being harassed verbally on Twitter. If you've been trolled, that's no fun, but it happens. And when it happens, who do you call? Call the police? You got a hotline to Elon? Hey, Elon, fix this. This is the thing about social media. You got a complaint? Make it go viral. It's like you can't just pick up the phone and like complain to PG&E or complain to your utility company. because it's social media. They keep arm's distance from consumer complaints, unless you want to sue them. I mean, you can't, there's no phone number. Who do you call? Upset with Facebook? Who do you call? Upset with Twitter? Who do you call? Go on all down the line. Google, all the top tech companies. They don't want to talk to you. They want to take your money. They don't want to talk. They want you on their site, but they don't want to talk to you. You're just a number. This is kind of the anti-human, anti-social thing of social media. It's the contradiction, and it's a threat to our democracy. So many negatives. I think I've just convinced myself to stop being so active in social media. Although, given the numbers, this is how you reach people. This is how you talk to people in the modern day. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. Regular listeners to this show know that these news meditations I have, they come up. I haven't been sleeping well, and I just found myself just thinking about a lot of these things. When I write stuff like about the Marcoses, if you are a Filipino and you have you are a dual citizen and have a right to vote, I hope you do get your ballot and vote. If you haven't gotten your ballot, go to the embassy. That is an election that the world is watching. What else? Well, that's it. Regular listeners to the show know that I try to end this section with a meditation that's self-affirming, a meditation that says, you're okay. You're okay. I mean, sometimes, we don't feel okay. And for whatever reason, I think what I've found, and this is coming from a guy who uses the term Amok as my metaphor. It is also on my middle name of my driver's license, but when I was younger, I'd say go amok. I think you have to go amok to a certain degree. And I just mean that in terms of like not letting things fester, not keeping things in. You have to have your Mount Pinatubo eruption of truth. But I really think sometimes, and mind you, I'm just learning this the last couple of years. Sometimes it's better to sit on your tongue and not say a thing and not react and not respond. Sometimes it's better just to be non-reactive and to think and to slow things down. You'll make better decisions. How did I come to that conclusion? By meditation, by mindfulness, by being in the moment, and by slowing things down, by slowing down thoughts, or knowing that thoughts can just go by. Let the thoughts go by. Before you can enter and you can stop those thoughts and you can deal with the relevant ones, make better decisions in your life, and not do anything rash. It goes back to my favorite definition of mindfulness, which was coined by Sharon Salzberg, who actually was taking it from a report in Oakland about how some meditators were teaching it to school kids, and they asked him what the definition of mindfulness was, and he said, the young 9-year-old kid said, the definition of mindfulness is, I don't punch that guy in the face. Yes, we don't have to punch that guy in the face or that gal. I mean, if you are a woman and you don't punch anyone in the face. You try to calm yourself. Put some space between you, the ideas, and you'll realize that there's more space between you and the ideas. There's so much more space. And with that greater sense of space, there is freedom. And then you can see things a little more clearly. And you can make better decisions that will impact your life. How do you do it? By being in the moment, by staying mindful, by breathing. Thich Nhat Hanh used to say, in breath, free, out breath, space. In breath, free, out breath, space. And he'd see how the world wasn't closing in on him, that there was actually more space, there was actually more, there was more around him. It was a larger area. And he was free. He felt free. And he made a better choice. Focusing on the in-breath. In-breath, free. Out-breath, space. It's helpful. It's helped me whenever I feel the world is making my closet smaller and smaller, and the Zoom boxes, the walls are coming in on the Zoom box. There's more space here than you think. Calm yourself. In breath, free. Out breath, space. And then there's our loving kindness meditation, where you may have doubts about what you can do, and who you are, and what you are, whether you can do it. Remember, you're enough. You're enough. You're enough. Here's, if you're feeling some kind of instability, maybe I don't want to call it trauma, but some kind of feeling. Sometimes a touch helps. Helps my microphone. Take this hand, put it here. Take this hand, put it here. And give yourself that grounding hug. And so, as I wish for me, I wish for you. May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be healthy. And may you live with ease. Back in tomorrow, 2 p.m. Pacific, live right here, wherever you're watching. Facebook, EmilGuillermo.media, YouTube, Emil Guillermo channel, Twitter, at Emil Amok, or on amok.com. Thank you for seeing me. I'm Emil Guillermo. Mahal Gitao.